The buffet. So now I would like to introduce one of the world's most renowned innovation professors from MIT. It's a great, it's almost like you're a friend of VINNOVA now. You've been here several times, and we're super happy that you had the time to come here today. So please give a warm hand for Eric von Hippel.
So I cannot live up to the introduction, it's quite clear. So it's only downhill from here. So maybe this one, huh? So, what I saw today, first of all, I'm so excited about the work that you're doing. So excited about the work you're doing, and want to help however I can. So what I'm going to plan to do, I see, the main thing I see in the presentations is first, very interesting, and then I also see that the ones that are already pilots that have been going along the last 4 have had expert advice from Hive or from Peter Kra, and so you have a deeper sense, or from Lars, so you have a deeper sense of, in those cases, of what a lead user is. Some of the other ones, there's this tendency to think, you know what, we get input from users, we select them, we don't know how, and then we invent. And that's really quite different, okay? So the core thing that I want to begin to tell, I don't know where the echoes are coming from, I'm sorry. But we have a sound man here, says he, inducing guilt. So, okay. So the thing is that what we have here is an understanding of the innovation process that has changed. Let's see if I have a slide here on this. I hope I do. I maybe don't. Users were not supposed to innovate. You know? I mean, individual users were supposed to consume. We have now done some surveys that are national representative surveys, finding out that approximately 6% of the population innovates. 6% of all the users out there actually, at some point or another, within, in this case of how it's measured, the last 3 years, have developed or improved a product for themselves to make it work better. Now, the fascinating thing is that all of this innovation activity is customarily ignored by manufacturers. Manufacturers go to the center of the market and say, what do you need that we can make for you? But the ratio of information out there to the amount of knowledge and engineers that producers have working on consumer goods is amazing. So for instance, in the UK, where the first study was done that was representative, there were 2.9 million people in the population innovating. 2.9 million making consumer goods for themselves. All of the R&D personnel working for consumer companies in the UK added up to 23,700. So the ratio was 100 to 1. And yet, when you go to the producer companies, they typically say, no, we find the user needs, and what we do is we innovate for them. So this effort at VINNOVA and the effort that you're engaged in is really to straighten out this problem, to become more aware of user innovations. User innovations are valuable because they actually work in real-life conditions. So who was the one that was doing orienteering, for example? Yeah, there you are. That was so cool. And you mentioned that those people were engineers and that they were really trying to solve problems for themselves. And if you look at the scale of those users in that community relative to the scale of the R&D people working for the producers, I'm sure the ratio is absolutely huge. Yeah. So The thing that I will add for you in a moment is about, anyway, I'll tell you in a moment. Okay, so here's the principle. Why do people think that producers are the innovators? It goes way back to Schumpeter in 1934. What you have here is a market curve. This is the center of the market. Economists look at the center of the market and they say, look, all these circles are users. Look, there are a lot of users here. So it must be the case that a producer can get their needs, it's the target market, and can spend money that aggregates all the needs of these users. So they obviously can spend more to develop a product for the users than can any individual user, right? So obviously, says Schumpeter, it must be the case that producers do a better job and are the innovators. Now, the thing that was missed in this was that at the leading edge of markets, they are small and uncertain, or at the leading edge of needs, a new orienteering need or whatever. The market is small and uncertain. It's not that there's a ratio of 100 to 1 where the manufacturer can outspend the user. And I'm going to give you an example of this. When you look back, you will see in every field, when it's functionally new, the user does it first. So, here's an example. This is John Hashem Gibbon, and this is the first heart-lung machine. So we're not only talking about consumer products, we are talking about professional products as well. So John Hashem Gibbon was a surgeon in the 1930s when there was a lot of rheumatic fever around. Rheumatic fever damages, among other things, the heart valves of children who contract it. And when the heart valves get enormously damaged, you cannot fix them. The child dies. If the heart valve is sort of like scarred and maybe you can reach into the beating heart and separate the little leaves of the valve, maybe it'll work. But many children were dying. And in his case, he was a surgeon in this area, and basically he operated on a neighbor's child and could not save the kid. And he was devastated, and he said, we have to do something about this. And so he went to the producers and said, look, we have to create a heart-lung machine. And they said, yeah, but is there a market? He said, yes, of course, there are all these dying children. And they said, well, have the techniques been developed yet? The operating techniques that a heart-lung machine is needed for? He says, no, because we need a heart-lung machine to do it. And they said, well, then how do we know that you can? He said, I'm a very good surgeon. And they said, yes, that's just the problem. You're such a good surgeon that the techniques you develop, no one else will be able to use. Anyway, net result is they had 1,000 reasons why it was not a good idea to develop this thing. And so what happened was they took away the tea and cookies that they had offered him at the boardroom table and said, in effect, come back when you, as a user, have developed a heart-lung machine. That is the pattern. Now, what happened next? Over 20 years, he developed a heart-lung machine. That's the first one there. He began to operate on patients. Now, the next thing that happens in this process is that here's John Hashem Gibbon over here. No market, so John has to do it, right? So he does it. Then what happens? Well, other people, other surgeons hear that there's some progress. And so they come and they say, oh, what you doing, John? Can we look? And he says, sure. And then they say, well, this is pretty good. What we'll do is we will actually make a copy. And he says, fabulous. Here are the plans. Now, what you see from a manufacturer's perspective, as this grows with user homemade solutions, what happens is eventually it looks like a market to the manufacturer. And the manufacturer says, oh, now there are 1,000 users with homemade machines. Now we see the techniques are there. Now we will develop a product. That is so different. And so what you are looking for is the leading edge of the process. Now, if we can talk about different needs that you found, right? I mean, it's the users who come along and say, we want to do this other thing in orienteering, right? And then they actually do it. And then what happens eventually is the producer says, okay, right? Now, so what I'm going to talk to you about is the idea that you want to have a head with respect to something. So for example, you would say, rather than they're all engineers and they're really good, you would say, I'm interested in a particular trend, let's say of precise orienteering. Who are the people with the highest precision needs? Or who are the people with the highest needs for getting into the weather, as you said, or whatever it might be, okay? So we'll get to that. But I think these projects around here are so cool, I got to tell you. So, okay, so now with this idea in mind, it's good that there are two of you. With this idea in mind of this curve, we defined lead users, okay? And we said lead users have two characteristics. One is they have needs that are ahead of general demand in the marketplace. And the second is they expect to obtain high benefit from solving it, okay? So now when you look at this curve, okay, and you said in the one with the kitchen for tomorrow, remember that one? Who was the kitchen for tomorrow person? Hi. Okay, so the thing is that what you want is you want to find people who have extreme needs. You know, not, you know, just people who enjoy being in the kitchen. And so that's the kind of thing we have to think about. Now, all of you may know there are videos on my website that are for free, and there's a project manual that's free that you can look at that goes step by step through the process if you find that useful. You can do much better than I, but I just thought that I would try to help. Okay, so lead users have those two characteristics. They have the characteristic of being ahead of general demand and high benefit. Now, when you look here, what is the reason? Ahead of general demand means that there will be a manufacturer's market. If you can project, there'll be some things that users want that don't foreshadow general need. You know, there's just a special need. And the user will innovate because the user wants to solve his own problem. But there are other things that the manufacturer cares about, that are ahead of a general need, and the user cares enough to invest effort in fixing it. Okay? So those are the reasons for those two attributes. Now, there are two ways, basically, to identify lead user innovations. One is you observe the crowd, okay? As in the John Hashem Gibbon case. You don't know what people want at all. There's no trend you don't know. You observe the crowd and you see what tends to build. The second method is you actually identify a trend. You say there is a trend in orienteering towards a particular kind of a activity. Who is most extreme on that trend? Right? So you might have 3 or 4 trends in orienteering, and they would have different lead users at the front. I don't know if can you identify a trend or two in orienteering? What kinds of things? We'll come back to that if you like. Okay? Okay. We'll come back to that, I hope. Okay, now, approach 1, finding the crowd and learning from what they're doing. One of the things that somebody mentioned, I think Peter, was that there's some research now that it's not only that users develop new products for themselves, they also found companies for themselves. And very often they do this because the crowd tells them they like what they're doing. So this is an example of the jogging stroller. Do you know, you've seen that thing, right? And with my kids, I thought it was crazy. You're using the child as a bumper, you know? I'm saying, God, you know? And I had my kid in it, and there was this dog as big as, you know, hello? You know, scary. Anyway, so the story behind that relates to this idea of the crowd. The story is that Phil Batchelor, I don't know if he's a bachelor now, but anyway, Phil Batchelor, was a jogger. And his wife said, stroll the baby. In the US, that means walk along the street, stroll the baby. He said, I want to jog. She said, stroll the baby or die. He said, that makes me think. So what he then did was he went to his garage. This is actually his garage. And he took wheels off his other children's bikes. Hopefully they had outgrown them. And he built that thing. And this is the commercial version. You can see how close it is. And he started then running around the neighborhood. Now here's the point with respect to the crowd. What then happened was that everybody he passed said, I want one of those, right? I gotta have one. And so that was for him the way that he discovered that he could make a company. It was not that he saw a trend, it was that there was demand coming from all over the place. Now, as you see, 80% of the companies in this particular industry, juvenile products, were started by users. And the story is repeated again and again. This is the first car seat, in a sense, for low birth weight babies. Now, you all know that if a baby has low weight, it's very floppy. You know, I mean, it has no muscle tone, it can't hold itself up, and car seats are actually very dangerous for those children. And so, but there's a law that you have to use a car seat. So this particular mother said, I'm damned if I'm putting my kid in that thing. And she built this, which became the first baby car seat for underweight babies. And so you see the same thing repeated again and again. In that case, the hospital was interested and said, oh, you know, you have to diffuse this. This is really important. Same pattern. Okay. Now, I'm going to jump. Here's Lego Mindstorms. Lego Mindstorms again. The thing is, this is now following the crowd again. So very quickly, I hope I have time, very quickly, again, following the crowd. This is Lego Mindstorms. Do you all know Lego Mindstorms? So some of you do. It's Lego bricks. It's a child's product, but in the bricks are some electronic components. What's the point? The point is that you can make little robots and so on out of it, things that move and so forth, because there's sensors and so on. So Lego introduced that product. And what happened then surprised them. What happened then, they had spent 7 years developing it with 7 engineers. What happened after they introduced it was that within 3 months, 1,000 hackers were working on it and improving it. Again, it's this ratio. And it made them so mad. Those horrible customers, they should know that they should simply stay there and consume. It is so evil when they innovate. You know, in fact, Sony, it's so funny because Sony, do you remember this thing called the Aibo dog? It was a little robot dog. Remember that? So what happened there was something very similar, namely that the dog was developed and the users hacked the code and did things like teach the dog to dance. Sony got so mad. We will sue you, they said, and they did, which is such a clever way to deal with user innovators, I think. You know, I mean, we're getting a long way from that. But now, in this particular case, Lego then looked to see where these people were coming from. And what they saw was not just random users, but an organized user community. And you may have this in some of your fields. Okay? So it was a self-organized user community, 20,000 people. Lego only has 50 in-house engineers. 20,000 people doing new things with Legos. 20,000 compared to 50. Well, we should ignore them, right? Now, they were organized into special interest groups, castles and clubs, train organizations, and so on. And the group called itself LugNet. And the reason it called itself LugNet was quite interesting. LugNet means Lego Users Group Net. They used to call themselves the Lego Users Group. But Lego's intellectual property lawyers had found them and said, we'll sue you if you don't change the name. So that was the sole contact they'd had with Lego, you know? So Lego looks at this, and when you think about it, remember, again, we're talking about following the crowd. So one method of finding lead users is to search for activity, or there might be existing activity, as in this case. You don't always have to start from scratch. So you implicitly, I'm sorry to always choose your example, I just thought it was such fun. Okay, in your case, there are probably clubs, orienteering clubs, right? And that's where you're going. So in a sense, what you're finding, you're not just looking in the world at large, you're finding small groups of people who care passionately. So that's already a great help in search processes, right? Now, Lego then did something much more clever than that. Lego said, oh, there are all these users out there. I, Lego, am going to set up a system that allows them, gives them something they want, namely communication, but then we can see what they're doing. So they created a net that was basically, it was called, now they're creating something else, but anyway, it was called Lego Factory, and you could post your design on that thing. So anybody who came up with a new design could post it on this Lego Factory website. But then Lego went further. They said, we will sell the product for you, or you can sell it through our website. You can design your own box. We'll package it for you, you can sell it. Now what happens then? Lego sees two things. Lego sees user innovations because the traffic is now going through a system they have, but Lego also sees customer demand because they can see how many people want whatever that thing is. So there are ways, in other words, to figure out how, by crowd activity, you can find out what's interesting, and on that curve, like with John Hashem Gibbon, you can see how many people are beginning to adopt it. Okay? Now, let's go to the second method, and this is the method that's in the book. Somebody mentioned here, I think again it was the kitchens, that you would collect yourself a group of lead users who then you would have, or something like that. I'm not sure if it was you or somebody else. But the point is that lead user searches, lead users differ each time, so it's an interesting issue. So here we have again this curve, right? And the curve basically is with respect, you remember, to a user need. So you have to identify what the need is. People are not ahead with respect to everything. Yours are ahead with respect to orienteering. And you can get even more precise because you can say, what kind of orienteering are they ahead on? So you would identify a trend that's important in your field. They're all trying to do something or other. Like, for instance, in kite surfing, they're all trying to increase hang time, the amount of time that you spend in the air. Whatever the trend is, you select it, and then you say, who's that? You know? That's the way to do it, rather than selecting random lead users or random users and then hoping to pull information out of them. What you want via the selection process is to get concentrated information. Once you've selected the lead users or the people you're going to evaluate, you're already a bit stuck. You have to put a lot of effort into finding the right people. Okay, so now, why it's not easy to find lead users, okay? When we study lead users, what we find is that there's not one or two lead users who are developing anything. This is a study of scientific instruments, and what you draw out of it is that it's a different person making important innovations each time, okay? That's why the search process is so important. You never know where it's going to come from, and here's an example of this. So, how many of you know of this thing, which is called the CAMBAC in the US? It's basically, you know about it? Great. So it's a drinking method for athletes and others. It's a method where there's a bag of water up here, and you suck the water through this tube. So that if you're on your bicycle, you would wear this thing, and there would be, you know, you'd carry other stuff down here, but there'd be a bag of water up high so that you didn't have to suck very hard to pull in water, and it was always sort of available on your bike helmet so that you could just lean over and do it. Now, where did this come from? Well, if you're a bike racer, you all have bikes, right? I assume, or almost most of you have bikes. How many of you have brackets on your bike where you can put a water bottle? Do you have those? So you know what they are, right? So that was the earlier solution for bike racing too. But in the case of bike racing, it's a terrible solution because basically you have to, when you're bike racing, you have to hold position. So you have to break position in order to reach and grab that thing, you know, and then one hand is off the handlebar and so on. It's just a mess. So where was this developed? This was developed by a user. And the interesting thing about this user, his name was Michael Edison. He did long bike races in Texas in the summer. Texas is very hot. In the summer, it's even hotter. Bad idea. So there must have been a lot of thirsty people. But what did Michael have that was unusual? What he had was he was a paramedic. Those are the people who drive ambulances, right? Rushing out to people's houses and so on. And in his ambulance were these bags and tubing. And so what he was familiar with was A, he was thirsty, and B, he was used to hydrating people. He was used to giving them water through tubes. Because often what happened was, these are saline solutions and so on, and what would happen would be, if a person was dehydrated, you'd immediately hydrate them by putting some saline in them. So what did he do? It was a short jump for him to come up with this innovation because of his experience. So he took a drinking system that he made surgical tubing and an IV bag that he took from his truck and sewed to his shirt. That was the first of these. Now, that's why the search process is so interesting. What you do is you find people who have an extreme need for something. That is like Michael Edison. But there are thousands of those people who are dumb enough to bike in Texas in the summer, right? Michael was the one who had a solution because of his abilities and connected experience. If the issue had been how to make a bike race faster, probably there were some aerodynamic engineers in there who could put wings on the bicycle, I don't know. But it would be a different person. So that's why it's so important. Now you see, if you had gotten a search, like in the case of the extreme kitchens, where it was people who were interested, all of a sudden you have, if you're lucky, Michael Edison in your group, but you probably have selected only 10 or 15 people, and they're thinking about what they might be able to do. The advantage that Michael has is he's done it. He knows that it works, and he can show you. So you want to do that kind of searching. Now, in this book, there is a, this is a book, again, it's free, it's on my website, I think it's on your website too, VINNOVA's website? Yes. Okay, so even though you and I both like to invent things over again, you know, that's the first thing I do in a research project. I say, forget everything everybody else did. But just take a look, okay? Because what we did there, these were the studies we did at 3M, where we had a standard teaching handbook for the teams. And it's quite detailed. It's pre-internet, so you will have to evolve it. But it was done in 1998. And so you'll have to evolve it, but it sort of goes through the steps, and you'll find that useful. And you'll also find useful as motivation. I don't know whether you told people about this, but unlike other methods, the lead user method, what we have done is we did the equivalent of a controlled clinical trial to see if it actually worked. And I was not the lead author on this. We did a controlled clinical trial at 3M where we taught people the method, and we had other people use standard methods, and then we compared the results. And the comparison was extraordinarily strong. The innovations developed by the users had 8 times more sales than the innovations that were developed by standard R&D methods. Now, in a time when we're trying to do Six Sigma and do the last little bit of improvement, to have an order of magnitude is amazing. And the reason is that users who have innovated for themselves have demonstrated that the solution works within the use context. That's so valuable. Companies, when they develop something for themselves, what companies have to do is they get the user need, they develop something they think is responsive, and they have the user test it. There's a lot of failure in that process. If you find things that users have already developed, you also have information about what works in the user context. Okay? So don't throw that information away. If we go through the ones who have done this, the virtual lead users, again, I had a question about that in the sense of, you know, maybe you could do something about, and maybe you have done, but find people who have extreme needs on these dimensions, right? And what I'm going to do now in a minute, and here's my suggestion, I'm going to give you an activity. How much time do we have?
10 minutes.
Oh, shoot, I'm going to give you an activity. Is that all?
Well.
I'm going to quickly give you an activity where you try this out, okay? Now, I'm going to give you a couple of examples, and maybe I won't be able to play the videos after all. But just to comment specifically, because I want you to try to use this information while it's fresh in your head. Comment specifically, the orienteering is great, and if you can, you know, sort of tie it to specific subcategories or so, that'd be fabulous. The all-weather bikers and the IKEA thing was very interesting because you were going to people who were actually doing whatever it was. Who was the all-weather biker person? Yeah, you were actually doing it, and if you could find people who were doing it in an extreme form, that'd be even better. You know, who are doing it in Alaska in the winter or some damn thing. You know, in other words, if they have developed it in more extreme categories than you, the solution is more robust. So, and so on. So now, okay, so here, again, is an example. What I've told you about so far, maybe we'll try, let's see, let's try this one. Let's try this one. This is conceptually easier. So the first thing you do is you identify a trend. This is about automobile braking. Okay? So automobiles have to be improved in many ways, but this particular one is about braking. So what you try to do, like the orienteering, you break it down into some subcategory. Then you say, well, if I ask the people in the middle of the market, they just simply don't want to skid, right? This is about braking on ice and so on. So what do? I go out the trend to the people with a more extreme need. Now, in automobiles, the people who are almost skidding all the time are race car drivers. So they have much better information on the need than do these people who might skid once in their lives and say, I don't want to do that again, right? That's the extent of their information. So these people are actually the people, when you all had to learn how to drive, I guess, or you were taught, you have it in schools here or something. Do you remember pumping the brakes? Do you remember that? You were taught, some of you, to do that? Okay. That was developed by race car drivers. Now, you can go out of your field remember what you're trying to do here, and if you read that workbook, you will see the concept of the advanced analog market. If you go out of your field, what you will find is other groups that have an even more extreme problem of the same kind. So you in orienteering, right? Those guys are trying to do something, but there are probably other people out there, whether they're trying to map the moon or whatever they're trying to do. Sorry? Or run faster, who have an even more extreme need. So in this case, it was aerospace. When you went outside and you said to these automobile people, well, who has a more extreme need? They said aerospace because an airplane is a lot bigger, it lands a lot faster, and you can't put sand or salt on a runway. They had to do something with the wheels. And so they are the ones who invented ABS braking, right? That's where that came from. So you see this. Now, what I want to do then, I guess I don't know how to help here. Shit, we're running out of time. Goodness, we're running out of time. We are running out of time. Okay, so I'm going to show you a quick video about how different these groups are. And then I want to ask you in the remaining minutes, the remaining now unspecified, we're getting somewhere, the unspecified minutes. Okay, I'm going to show you an example of how extreme you go to the, how far out you can go to find advanced solutions. You're not stuck within people who are doing orienteering or kitchens or whatever. You think about a dimension. So this particular one, this lead user search, it's a 5-minute video, is about a Nortel search for people finding ways to orient themselves. This was before GPS. Finding ways to orient themselves because they wanted to deliver wireless cell phone services that are so common today that are location-based. Okay? So they began to look outside to see what was going on. And here we have, let me get it to view, enter full screen.
Dr. Churchill will illustrate the lead user search strategy using the lead user study conducted at Nortel Networks. First, some background on the Nortel Networks lead user project. Nortel Networks is a global internet and communications leader with capabilities spanning optical, wireless, local internet, and e-business. In 1999, Nortel Networks conducted a lead user study to uncover a whole new class of web applications for voice, video, and data. The targeted user segments were wireless internet consumers and businesses. Dr. Anthony Hall, director of the Human Centrics Group at Nortel, initiated the study as a way to identify breakthroughs that weren't possible with conventional innovation approaches.
The lead user methodology allows us to work with people that experience the future before most. And so by talking with those individuals, we can mine their innovations and commercialize them more readily.
The Nortel Network lead user study was carried out by a 4-person team led by Kelly Blasco, electrical engineer and senior advisor in market analysis.
Now I want to walk you through the lead user search process, starting with the first step, identifying important trends. A search must always begin with a trend analysis, because recall that by definition, lead users have needs that are ahead of others with respect to specific trends. Now, the trend investigation is really the subject of another video, but the Nortel Network study will give you an idea of how this step is carried out.
The team began with a review of current trade literature. Next, team members interviewed leading experts in a number of different fields, ranging from oil field operations and military applications to aviation and public safety.
Despite the diversity of experts we interviewed, each one identified mobility as the most critical attribute in the internet solutions they were using and the problems they were trying to solve. So these interviews verified that we were on the right track in deciding to focus on the critical mobility needs of wireless internet users.
Let's say now that your team has zeroed in on a few major market trends. Recall then that the next step involves generating ideas on possible sources of lead users. Now here it's going to help you to consider types of individuals or firms that have a high incentive to innovate because of their leading-edge needs.
As an aid in thinking of lead user sources, the Nortel Networks team started by spelling out the key attributes that lead users should have.
Based on the trends we identified, we decided that our lead users had to display one or more of three characteristics. First of all, the lead users had to be highly mobile. Secondly, they had to have a high need to communicate using both voice and data. And third, they had to have a critical need for real-time and location-based data.
Among the targeted Internet consumers and organizations, the team thought of law enforcement officers and paramedics as two possible lead user sources because they operate from mobile offices and require continuous as-it-happens information. In fields outside the target market, the team thought of specialists associated with the military who were working on wireless Internet applications.
Our thinking was that in battlefield operations, there is a strong need for getting the right information to the right people as conditions rapidly change.
Now let's turn our attention to the actual networking process used to locate lead users.
The networking technique is built on the fact that people who have a serious interest in a particular subject are likely to know someone who is more expert than they are. Team members conduct telephone interviews to network their way up to leading-edge users. It would seem that lead users might also be found using some type of written screening questionnaire. A standardized survey simply won't provide enough information to tell you which people might be the actual lead users. Psychologist Joe Piso, a member of the Nortel Networks team, had a real knack for quickly tracking down lead users. And his approach is a good illustration of how the networking process works.
Joe Piso found several lead users among researchers who studied the habits of animals in their natural environments. He found their names from citations in a magazine article on animal tracking and then interviewed each one to determine if they were true lead users.
Well, before each interview, I did some reading and basic research on animal tracking so I could ask intelligent questions. Then during the interviews, I focused my questions on assessing two areas: the person's breadth of knowledge and their level of innovativeness. For instance, the animal tracker I found had significant breadth of knowledge and experience. He'd tracked Arctic seals, elephants in Malaysia, and sea turtles as well. He also was very familiar with other leading-edge animal tracking efforts from around the world. And he was innovative in his approach. For example, he envisioned a future where an animal could be tracked remotely with video, biological, and environmental data captured by intelligent technology on the animal. That data could then be monitored over the internet or even broadcast to schools.
One final tip for your networking interviews. As Eric von Hippel emphasized, look for people who have really novel, surprise information to offer your team.
Through the interviews, there were a number of discoveries that were important to the team. For instance, we found that the lead users shared a common need to obtain real-time location-based information, and they didn't have time to wait for that information. Another important learning was that our lead users needed location-based information that was linked to them at all times.
Based on these discoveries, the team sought out lead users among professional storm trackers, a group with a high need for both real-time and location-based data.
We interviewed a number of storm chasers who were doing innovative work. We found that they had developed innovative ways to send and receive fast-changing weather data among multiple vehicles chasing unpredictable storms.
The Nortel Networks team actually identified over 20 lead users using the search process we've described.
Now, and see how extreme it is, in a sense. So you have such room to go. I mean, when you talk about, the skiing system, you're in the skiing business, I think, right? So, and you talked about the waxing of the skis. Now, that is fabulous. It is absolutely fabulous, and it's within the area where it's about skiing. But if you were to look at people who had to do the same kind of surface smoothing, maybe but in a more extreme form, you'd find even more. So for example, how do they make semiconductors smooth, or whatever it might be, right? So the way you do this thing is you ask people, as it says in there, you ask people, you're searching now, I'm telling you the method for searching for lead users. You search for people who care a lot about it, like, for instance, your waxers, right? And then you say, because they're expert, you say, who do you know who knows more than you do? Okay? And they will tell you, because if they care about something, they will know somebody who knows more. So if you talk to the waxers who happen to be at your place and you say, what is a critical matter in waxing? And then they say, well, it's doing X. And you say, well, you're fabulous at that. And they say, yeah. You say, but do you know anybody who's even better? And everybody in skiing would say, yes, I know somebody who's better. And that's how you track out. Now, when you get to the best waxers, they start to look beyond the sport altogether. And they're starting to say things like, well, I found it out there. So the example that I just showed you here about location-based services, there were no human services at that time in the internet that were location-based, but there were people tracking animals who had to find some way to find out where the animal was. And so they developed a system. And there were people who had to track storms with multiple airplanes flying around, and you had to know, in order to make this information fit together into a weather model, you had to know where each one was that was picking up the information. And they had developed a system like that. So the learnings here and the fun are huge. You're getting up, so you're, all right, I'll stop.
So we have room for a couple of questions. Thank you again, Eric.
You're welcome.
And we have a mic, and we start with Pelle. Okay. Please name and title or where you come from.
Okay, my name is I'm a professor at Karlstad University, working at the Service Research Center that we have there. And I have a question for you, Eric. Thank you for your very nice and pedagogic presentation also. What is the most difficult part with lead user processes, do you think? What is the largest obstacle that you hear people talk about? When I listen to you right now, I interpreted it as it regarded understanding the definition of lead users. Is that typical difficulty, or are there other ones?
It's very difficult. I mean, you're all pioneers because, and there are different levels of difficulty as you're implying. One level of difficulty is that firms don't want users to invent the things that they produce. They would rather invent them themselves. And so if you give a firm a chance, it will move away from finding user innovations to finding user needs. And then the other thing is that it's sort of a new process which is not like a survey. And so you have to sort of really wrap your mind around the novelty of it. And I would say, I mean, you're expert in this, I know. And I would say to all of you who have projects that the thing to do is the first time around, this is hard. Find yourself somebody who's already done one. Find yourself some consultant who's a professor, or, you know, like Hive or Peter or something like that. Just find yourself a way to get a couple days worth of effort to get yourself on the right track. So it'll get easier. It's just odd right now. Anybody
Questions?
else?
Yeah. Yes, please.
I'm Jonas Matting, former colleague to Peter.
Yeah, another expert in the crowd.
And now I work for a company called SP.
Mm-hmm.
So, Eric, would you say, is there any industries that are more suitable for lead user studies than others?
Well, I think, again, users innovate where it's functionally novel. So if you have a commodity industry where nothing changes, not so interesting. But, you know, in skiing or orienteering, even though skiing is an older sport, you know, they're still pushing new things to do. And so whenever people are pushing new things to do, you will find lead users. It's a matter of ahead of the crowd. If there is an ahead, if there are ways that things are changing, you will find lead users. So I think, you know, yeah, commodity stuff maybe not, but most things, for functional novelty, you can find them. Yeah. Well, you did services, right? You did new services on cell phones. And you found, as I remember, that the students were coming up with the best ideas, the users of the services. So it makes sense. Yeah. Anybody else?
Great. Yes, here we have a third question.
Mm-hmm.
Nina Kask from the packaging arena. I think I have a maybe similar question to the one that Jonas had, but when it comes to products with low engagement, do you have any cases or examples of lead user innovation?
I mean, people always come to me and say, you know, nobody cares about my product, right? And then one thing I would suggest is go look on the web and see if there's already a users group out there. Because again, remember, so for instance, John Deere tractors, do you know what they are? They're lawn tractors. They mow lawns. So they came and they said, well, nobody cares about lawn tractors, but we are inventing this wonderful thing about an automated lawnmower that'll run by GPS and not run over your child and all the rest of this and mow the lawn. And I said, that's fabulous. And they said, but you know, we can't use lead users because there are no lead users groups. So I said, fine, look on the web. And they found 12 groups of lead users. 3 of them were developing automated lawnmowers that would run around the lawn without running over your child. So somebody cares about everything. I mean, it was astonishing. Somebody cares about sobs, for example. You know, I mean, you know, so, I mean, gee, you know, one last example is so cool. Mailing machines. There's some people who care about mailing machines. Who could imagine such a thing? What were you doing again? I can't remember. What was your project?
It's the Oriflame project with packaging for wellness products.
Yeah.
And the Meal 2 project as well. Yeah,
and you will find extreme users, people who are climbing mountains and so on, who have to package this stuff. They don't have, if you go more extreme, you will find people who care. Okay? Cool.
Great. No more questions? Eric is going to Hamburg in a short while to receive a, what do you say, doctor's degree, I almost said, but no. What is it called? Honorary professorship, yeah?
Yeah.
And we're really pleased to have you here. We would like to thank you very much with a warm applause and a little gift. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.